Nothing prepares you for this. I cheered, I shouted, I fist pumped the air, I cried, I stood and cheered. It's absolutely everything that you hoped it was going to be.
Opinions are like arseholes. Everybody has one, and I'm here to show you mine. God of War Ragnarok is one of the greatest games ever made. It is as close as can be to video game cinematic storytelling perfection, that is elevated by fantastically smooth and compelling gameplay that complements the story in ways that were genuinely surprising to me, making it the ultimate video game blockbuster.
Then why? Why?
I've been a fan of God of War since the first game back on the PS2 in 2005. However, I know a lot of people were introduced to the series with 2018's God of War, which gave the series possibly the biggest facial reconstruction in the history of games. It took the world by storm, transforming a two-dimensional character that killed man, woman, titans and gods first and asked questions never, into a profound, relatable character that was more man than god, creating a deep, flawed but human Kratos in a touching story of father and son bonding. And for that, I think God of War 2018 will always be the more memorable and respected game in the franchise. And with Ragnarok being a more natural continuation of that game, it did lose some of that initial shock factor in the opening hours, but it did ultimately take what made God of War so great and surpassed it in almost every way possible.
I've been waiting for this.
The only thing more beautiful than a newborn baby is God of War Ragnarok. From the first frame to the last, it is a visual stimulant for the eyeballs. This time, traversing through all 9 realms, there is so much variety in the game's visuals that every location feels unique and is a joy to explore. There is so much detail in the world, the ice-cold ruins of the Lake of Nine that is frozen over, the lush greenlands of Vanaheim and the super chilled rehab vibe of Asgard, like you are about to see Macaulay Culkin walk by. There are living creatures residing in these lands, living people who are not queuing to see if they can fit their fist in your spleen. The world feels much more alive and grander in scale than before, and was surprisingly vibrant considering the world-shattering arrival of Fimbulwinter. But it's not just its charming good looks. The entire production is a technical triumph. That thumping, iconic musical score, the animations and motion capture, Christopher Judge, Sonny Suljic, Ryan Hurst, Richard Schiff, the strong cast and the technology that brings them to life on screen straps these characters into a rollercoaster of emotions, elevating them beyond the realm of good graphics. You can see the pain, the joy and sorrows in these characters' faces by just the shivering of their lips like a child who dropped their last bonbon down a drain. These are genuine performances that stand up against the biggest of Hollywood movies, but they're not all just macho. They're nuanced and subtle in the game's quieter, story-driven moments that bring real emotion to the player.
To be honest, I don't think I can do either. There's still a part of me that is so angry that it'll always be. It'll always be angry.
I'm not exaggerating when I say there were many moments that pulled at my heartstrings, and a couple that ripped my heart out altogether. Incredibly gripping stuff that is no doubt helped by the brilliant writing, successfully continuing the stories of these characters in some of the greatest character development there is in the history of stories.
Time is running out. The prophecies say Fimbulwinter leads to Ragnarok. War is coming.
Picking up a few years after the end of God of War, Kratos and Atreus are hiding out in the loneliness of Midgard trying to survive Fimbulwinter, caused by their own doing by reluctantly killing Baldur in the previous game. Hunted by a vengeful Freya, opening with an awesome chase sequence, Ragnarok looms around the corner and conflicts boil between father and son as they debate whether war and prophecy are the answers to avoiding the end of times. Kratos, reluctant to see any more bloodshed despite his vengeful, bloody nature, is going through the newfound hardships of fathering a teenager. Trying to protect his son from a fate he once lived, Atreus is curious of his newfound identity of Loki and what it really means, wishing to break away from the arms of his now loving father to write and fulfill his own destiny.
Tell me. I have tried to walk this path with you. We follow your every whim.
But you don't believe in any of it.
And still, I follow. Because all that matters is that you are safe.
But that's not all that matters. Who's keeping you safe?
Now the story doesn't feel as personal as the prior journey to scatter Freya's ashes in the highest peak of all the realms, with more bigger than life itself threats and goals, but the poignant moments are still present and are never put on the back burner in favour of spectacle. In fact, they work in unison. The chemistry between our duo of heroes is a striking contrast from their relationship in 2018's God of War, which saw Kratos reluctant to be the father he needed to be, Atreus being a burden to him. Here you can really tell Kratos cherishes his son and wants nothing more to protect him. Ragnarok's themes are family, doing right and wrong by our parents or kids, passing on to the next generation, and the trust we place in each other. Despite Kratos being the primary playable protagonist in Ragnarok, this is just as much the story of Atreus and the mystery of the prophecy of Loki, a common interest amongst our much larger roster of characters this time around. Like the Corleones before them in The Godfather, Kratos is the Don of the family and our companions we meet in building our army against the armies of Odin. Yet at times feels nothing more than a supporting character, as Atreus, our Michael Corleone, grows to become our central figure, both surrounded by friends and foes, never knowing who is truly closer. The respect and conflict through the game between these two characters adds weight to the story beats to create a consistent yet subtle foreboding tension. They clearly have a love for each other that grows over time, but are threatened by new alliances, old ones broken, secrets to protect and hide from each other that adds a chilling amount of foreshadowing to each scene.
Say hello to Loki.
Especially if you have knowledge of the Norse mythology surrounding everything and the potential relationships and motives of these characters. Even if you are someone whose knowledge is purely from the representation of Norse mythology in Marvel movies. As Mimir tells you the tales of the lands and Kratos speaks of his own past in hilarious ways, Ragnarok mixes his own narrative with Norse mythology just as well as before, perhaps more since we are introduced to many of the characters we have heard so much about. But these characters are from no damn comic book. Thor is a bulky, drunk, struggling father who is under the pressuring thumb of his father Odin.
Don't do it.
It's already done. Let it be known, the God of Thunder is good for two things: killing giants and pissing me!
Speaking of whom, I was initially thrown off a little by this rendition of Odin, being like something straight out of Goodfellas.
What do you want?
How about peace? How does peace strike the esteemed, retired God of War? How about we just don't kill each other? How about you stay home, kick up your feet, seek no quarrel with me, and I'll have none with you.
Bada bing, bada boom. But even this mafioso persona made for a charismatic villain, one that was just as compelling as it was threatening whenever he was on screen. The All-Father of these lands is drowning in fear of not knowing how this will end and seeks peace in his own twisted way, hoping for answers that no one can give to his future. I think this is summed up perfectly in a few simple lines of dialogue.
You know what drives me? What I really want? I want answers. Same as you. See, mortals have it easy. When they push up against life's big questions, they can look to us. They give them meaning, divine comfort. We both know that's a sham. But when we have questions, why are we here? To give meaning to mortals while living without it ourselves? No. We're more than that. And I found something that proves it.
Freya, a grief-ridden mother whose loyalties lie in doubt, who soon becomes one of the strongest-willed characters in the game through a great selection of side quests. Side quests that have seriously been ramped up from just being favours for spirits, although those are still here. But the majority of quests feel like an expansion of the main story, not an add-on.
Big footprint.
Smartest man alive.
Well, you try making conversation with you sometime.
He's got a
Brock and Sindri have their own struggles and moments that I truly didn't expect. Believable character development goes beyond our two heroes, giving each villain, companion, minor character depth, and their moments, allowing players to sympathise and understand the motives of all characters, even those trying to rid us from all 9 realms and beyond. Again, playing out in a single shot, we are always in the action and drama like we are the head strapped to a god-killing god's panty line, but our two heroes are often separated, leading their own paths back to their inevitable finale. As family or as rivals, an idea that swung around like the burning blades of chaos, teasing that of a similar plot to Return of the Jedi. I mean, Odin and Atreus' relationship is basically Chancellor Palpatine and Anakin Skywalker, I'm not gonna lie.
What is it?
It's what drives me. You feel it, don't you?
Feels
You
like
know the dark side.
knowledge. Truth.
Use
My truth.
knowledge. I beg you.
All the answers.
Only through
To find
me
out why
can you
we're here,
achieve
learn
a
how to
power
change our fate,
greater than
stop
any Jedi.
Ragnarok for good, maybe? Save the people we love.
And you will be able to save your wife
How?
from certain death.
The story boils towards its climax and creates an immense sense of danger, although not totally unpredictable, and the final act does somewhat come up short in the epic showdown department considering the enormous build-up. It is a wonderfully told tale that leads me into Ragnarok's greatest success. Ragnarok does something I feel even 2018's game did not do to this degree, and something that is rarely accomplished in any game. It takes Kratos, the God of War, the titular character, and Atreus, aka Loki, and makes invulnerable heroes feel incredibly vulnerable, and that is how you keep a firm grip on the player's balls. It is a character driven story as much as it is about wars and gods, but damn, I haven't even mentioned the gameplay yet, and it's, well, pretty friggin' good.
You seem like a calm and reasonable person. Are you? A calm and reasonable person. If the moment calls for calm.
It hasn't changed drastically from the previous title, but why fix what is not broken? In fact, it feels enhanced. Like how Doom Eternal didn't reinvent the formula of Doom 2016, which came at you like a piece of raw demon flesh to the face, but added enough polish, new features and improved level design to master an already exceptional combat system and gameplay loop. Progressing through the story will unlock the 9 realms, the majority of which can be accessed and explored at your own pace. Back is the Metroidvania style level design. Certain areas and puzzles will be locked behind abilities and skills you are yet to obtain, like certain arrow types, weapons and companions, which you will have to acquire and come back to later on to fully complete an area, whether that be through the story or through your own backtracking. Yet it never feels like needless backtracking due to the loot to collect and enemies to kill. Each explorable realm is a fairly large sandbox that gets bigger as you obtain those said skills, often opening entirely new paths, packed full of items to collect, characters to meet and bosses to kill. Vanaheim and Alfheim, for example, double in size by unlocking these new areas. That encourages replayability and the return to some older realms visited in the previous game, inspiring as opposed to succumbing to the risk of feeling like recycled assets are being used. Enough has been changed and added to these realms that they do more often than not feel like they are new levels entirely, with just enough recognisable structure to feel like this is an evolution of the world from the previous game. Starting out with the signature blades of Chaos and Leviathan Axe, combat feels punchy with a massive amount of weight behind it. Light attacks with R1 and heavy with R2, the weapons are incredibly satisfying to use. Various upgrades increase combo lengths for some devastating blows, and each weapon can be equipped with a light or heavy runic ability. Some are carbon copies of those from the previous game, and it did take a weird amount of time to actually obtain some heavy runic attacks, which did make the combat at first feel like it was kind of holding back and a little too similar to the first game, especially having played another playthrough of it recently. However, once the upgrades and abilities start coming in, combat was varied with the amount of skills and combos that it never got to the point of feeling repetitive, but addictive whilst it maintains consistent evolution throughout the story. Crowd control for large groups of enemies with this giant tornado of frost and swinging around the flaming blades like you just don't care, to powerful lunge attacks for large amounts of damage to a singular foe, all of the abilities worked well and added to making the combat feel balanced, even when things get heated and in those more difficult moments. There are some additional weapons and shields this time around as well. Various different shields can be equipped, which I really liked, and each came with a unique ability, whether that be a better parry window or a Spartan charge attack that builds up as it defends against enemy blows. Spartan Rage has multiple modes that allow for different playstyles, which were very useful in some of the more difficult fights, of which there are many, but it never feels unfair as these new features give the fights balance. Spartan Rage can be activated to go to Pound Town while slightly increasing your health as it did in the prior game, or there are other variations like instant heal or the ability to one-hit an enemy as opposed to taking out your rage on multiple with less damage per hit. The finishers are also more enjoyable this time around by actually implementing the weapons of use, instead of just defaulting to Kratos using his hands to make 2 out of 1 grunt. I would have liked to see some more variation with these finishers still, and some enemy types like the Flame Gradunga are always finished off with the Blades of Chaos regardless of the equipped weapon. But the expanded use of weapons in these finisher moves appease their need for brutal combat, which the game has a bucket load of.
Ready! Do not!
Together!
Kratos acquires a new weapon in the game in the form of the spear that fits his history nicely and allows for a new strategic playstyle with setting up barricades of spears set to detonate at a single slam to the ground like a Spartan general, which he is. However, my greedy self would have liked to see some more new weapons, one obvious one in particular. You know what that is. It's not like it feels there is a lack to choose from when it comes to the weaponry thanks to the assortment of abilities acquired for those said weapons and the way in which we, the player, can adapt to each enemy type. It's just so gutting the moment I accepted the fact Kratos would never wield Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, whatever. It is like that girl winking at you all night from across the dance floor to then realise her boyfriend was standing behind you the entire time. An ultimate tease for the entire game. But your weapons can be buffed with their respective powers, fire, ice, wind, to allow for additional damage, and the game promotes the switching of weapons to allow for combos and additional damage by say using fire on an enemy smothered in ice. Some enemies are resistant to certain elements, pushing you further to switch up tactics in the heat of combat. And the enemy variety in that combat here in Ragnarok excels. One of my biggest problems with God of War 2018 was the lack of variety in things to kill, specifically the boss battles and mini-bosses, always being trolls or ancients, and outside 2 or 3 boss battles, they were pretty underwhelming when compared to say God of War 3's roster of insane fights. Ragnarok fixes this even more than Jim ever could. Like the characters, the roster of enemies has increased, including the boss battles. There are some recycled enemies and animations here from the previous game, like the Ancients, which haven't changed at all, but these are few and far between in comparison due to all the new and awesome foes along the way. Interesting enemy variety is more consistent and epic in its scale, each fight being brutal and cinematic. Some are used a few times, but they never get to the same point of repetitiveness due to the larger number of different threats. But like 2018's game, the best boss of the Game Award falls to Heimdall. A one-on-one battle of gods, like the Boulder fight before it, that sees a new creative battle tactic thanks to that new spear I mentioned, and the potential narrative repercussions it has for Kratos as he decides what kind of god he really is. Very, very cool, especially if you are familiar with Kratos' old animalistic ways before he became the daddy of war. The wheel of combat has not been reinvented, but it feels more fluid here in Ragnarok, partly due to the tweaks in maneuverability which allow for better level design in the battle arenas. Atreus no longer has to become your backpack in order to climb to new heights, and Kratos himself uses his blades to navigate quicker around the levels. That also happens in combat. We essentially have a grapple hook, and by adding these small but impactful changes to the movement of the character, it allows for more verticality. Enemies will be elevated, but you can zip up with ease, or jump down and pound with a powerful aerial attack. A simple change, but one that allows for more interesting level design in the battlefield. Now Atreus isn't the backpack he used to be, but there are still some incredibly tedious moments of crawling through tight spaces, loading screens in disguise, I am sure, but that doesn't make them any less annoying. Now I want to go back to what I mentioned earlier, in that the game makes our characters feel more vulnerable this time around. What is perhaps Ragnarok's biggest surprise for me is something that I don't think will get the love it deserves, but it works so well from a narrative standpoint and adds a new layer of gameplay that I didn't think would ever work, and that is we get to play as Atreus for a sizable chunk of the game, which added far more depth to Ragnarok than I could have ever imagined. First off, these sections do have their problems. At times the pacing does come to a bit of a sinkhole in these moments, hand-holding exposition while Atreus slowly walks around the swamps of Jotunheim with Angrboda, or riding the back of a large animal, which he clearly enjoys doing as we do it quite often. But those moments do not detract from what I can presume to be the developer's intention, putting doubt in the player's mind of the future of Kratos, and the possibility of this series going from God of War to Boy of War. These levels are more linear than Kratos' gameplay, but Atreus comes with his own fighting style. Equipped with a bow, not just for arrows but melee attacks and finishes like hunting deer is not the only thing he and his father did in their downtime. He has his own upgrades, companions and Spartan rage that turns him into a goddamn wolf or bear, which is just as overkill as it is satisfying. These systems aren't as fleshed out as Kratos, unable to upgrade armour but still retaining runic abilities and skill upgrades on a smaller scale, but it worked very well. Well enough that I did not mind these sections once past the walk and talk tours, and for a series in which Kratos has always been the playable character, it invoked fear and excitement in me that perhaps there is no escape from the looming fate of Kratos.
He stomps away, followed closely by Freya.
I enjoyed your story, Kratos. Pity it has to end so soon.
The game can clearly work without him if the developers so wish it from a gameplay standpoint, albeit a little more meat on the bones will be needed if that is indeed the case. But these surprises in the gameplay formula and the impeccable storytelling that aids the transition, it made me feel something for an unkillable character that I have not in a long time. And not just simply the fate of Kratos, but the relationship between the two as they follow their own literal paths at times, and Atreus is quickly replaced as a companion in these moments. And regardless of how fate turned out for the two heroes in the end, God of War Ragnarok is full of emotion, excitement, brilliant storytelling, awesome and fun gameplay, all accumulating in an unforgettable journey. One of the finest examples of how video games can rival the biggest blockbuster movies in recent memory, and if this truly is the final time Kratos leads us to the forefront of war, then farewell my friend, it's been a damn fine day. And that's it from me. What did you think of God of War Ragnarok? Did you like it? Did you hate it? Let me know in the comments below. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. I love making these videos and I hope you enjoy watching them. And if you do and you want to see more, consider subscribing. Thanks for tuning in and see you on the next one.